In the stillness of early morning, fog clung to the trees like cobwebs. The air was heavy with dew, the kind that silences footsteps and makes the world feel like it's holding its breath. A long dirt road snaked through the dense woods of Briar Valley, leading toward a creaking wooden bridge that crossed over Coldmere Creek. Just beyond the bridge, the sleepy town of Wayton prepared for another day. Jonah Miller sat atop his cart, reins in hand, and whistled softly to his horse, a large bay mare named Agnes. She was old but strong, with a dignified air that Jonah often joked made her better mannered than most people he knew. He had inherited her from his grandfather, along with the delivery route that supplied goods to Wayton's outlying farms. This morning was supposed to be routine. Oats, flour, dried beans, and letters packed in the cart's wooden bed. The sun was just beginning to rise behind the trees, casting a silvery glow over the frost-tipped grass. Agnes trudged along without protest. Until they reached the bridge. Jonah tugged the reins gently, steering her toward the wooden planks. But the horse stopped. Agnes didn't just pause, she froze. Her ears turned back, her legs locked, and her chest heaved. Her body trembled in a way Jonah had never seen before. She stood like a statue, eyes wide, staring at the bridge with something between fear and memory. If animals could remember such things. "Come on, girl," Jonah muttered, giving the reins a little shake. Agnes didn't move. He clicked his tongue. He nudged her flanks with the side of his boot. Nothing. He climbed down from the cart, boots crunching on the gravel, and walked around to face her. Her eyes were locked on the bridge, unblinking. Jonah turned and looked. The bridge looked normal. Weathered, sure, but still strong. Its thick oak beams groaned slightly in the morning breeze. The boards were damp with dew, but it had carried heavier loads than this. He had crossed this bridge 3 times a week for the last 2 years. So had Agnes. There had never been a problem. "What's gotten into you?" He patted her side, gently tugging at her bridle. Her hooves stayed rooted. She snorted, low and tense, and backed away. Just one step. Then another. She was scared. Jonah had never seen her scared. "Fine," he sighed. "We'll go around." But going around meant an extra 2 hours, and that meant the deliveries would be late. Still, it was better than trying to force a panicked horse over a bridge. Jonah turned the cart around, annoyed, but mostly confused. Agnes calmed instantly the moment they moved away from the bridge, walking normally as if nothing had happened. As if the moment had vanished like fog in the sun. The rest of the day passed without trouble. But something lingered in Jonah's mind. That bridge. That frozen stare. That trembling in her legs. That wasn't normal. The next day, he tried again. Same time. Same cart. Same weight. Same horse. Same result. She wouldn't cross. Not even close. This time, Jonah stood on the bridge himself and tried to coax her. He even laid oats along the planks to lure her step by step. Agnes inched forward, sniffed the first few scattered grains, and then reared up with a cry that sounded almost like pain. She turned so suddenly that she nearly knocked Jonah down. People started noticing. Old Mr. Griggs at the post office said maybe the boards had termites. Elena Carver from the bakery said maybe she sensed a wolf. But no one could deny that something strange was happening. On the 3rd morning, Jonah stopped in front of the bridge and just watched. Agnes didn't just fear it. She hated it. The longer she stared, the more agitated she grew. Not wildly. No kicking, no bucking. But something deeper. Primal. An ancient resistance in her bones. So Jonah did something he hadn't done in years. He walked to the back of the barn, behind stacks of tools and crates, and opened the rusted trunk his grandfather had left him. Inside were old photographs, folded delivery maps, bits of harness, and a leather-bound notebook. Jonah hadn't touched it in nearly a decade. His grandfather, Thomas Miller, had driven these same roads. Same horse. Same bridge. But he had never mentioned any trouble with it. Not once. Until Jonah found page 32. The entry was dated August 12, 1955. Agnes froze again today, right before the bridge. Don't know why. Same place her dam refused to cross when I was young. I always thought it was wind, or deer spooking her. But now, not so sure. Could be something in the blood. Or something buried deep. Jonah sat back, stunned. Agnes's mother had refused to cross the same bridge. And his grandfather had written it off as superstition? Suddenly the stillness of Coldmere Creek didn't feel so quiet anymore. Jonah leaned against the barn wall and stared out the window at the sliver of the bridge visible through the trees. What did they know? His horse, and her mother, and maybe his grandfather too. That he didn't? And why did it still haunt them? The next day, he went back. No cart. No reins. Just him and Agnes, walking side by side, until they reached the start of the bridge. She stopped again. But this time Jonah didn't try to coax her forward. He stood beside her. And he waited. Then, without warning, Agnes slowly lifted her head toward the woods beside the bridge. Her ears turned. Jonah followed her gaze. At first, he saw nothing. Then a flash of white. A pale glimmer between the trees. And a sound. A distant creak. Not wood groaning, but something else. A snap. Then silence. Jonah took a step forward, and the bridge gave a low moan under his boot. Agnes backed away again, low and shaking. And Jonah finally began to feel it too. Not fear exactly. Not cold either. But the strange feeling that someone had died here. And maybe the horse hadn't forgotten. Maybe the bridge hadn't either. The fog had burned off by mid-morning, but Jonah Miller still felt a chill in his bones as he stood in the doorway of the old general store. The place smelled of sawdust, pipe smoke, and the past. A worn brass bell jingled as he stepped inside, and a head lifted from behind the counter. Mavis Prentice had run the store longer than most people had been alive. She wore glasses on a chain and had a voice that could cut through any lie. If there were secrets buried in Briar Valley, she had probably sold them a tin of tobacco or a spool of thread on their way through. "Jonah," she said, narrowing her eyes as he approached. "You look like you've seen the devil on the road." "Not the devil," Jonah muttered. "A bridge. And a horse that won't go near it." She paused, blinked once, then walked out from behind the counter without a word and motioned him to follow. They went into the back room, where a wood-burning stove hissed softly in the corner. She poured 2 cups of tea and set one in front of him. No cream. No sugar. Just hot and bitter, like truth. "Your grandfather ever tell you what happened on that bridge?" she asked without looking up. Jonah shook his head. "Not really. Just wrote a note about Agnes's dam refusing to cross it too. Said he didn't understand why. Didn't think much of it." Mavis stared into her tea for a long moment. Most people don't. Until something won't let 'em forget. "What happened?" she sighed. "The first Coldmere Bridge wasn't just for wagons. Back in 1902, it was the only way in and out of the valley during winter. Narrow thing. 1 lane. And on a stormy night in December, a family tried to cross it in a horse-drawn sled." Jonah leaned forward. "It collapsed. Collapsed. Aging beams. Too much snow. Maybe sabotage," some whispered. "No one ever found out. The sled fell straight into the creek below. Husband. Wife. 2 children. All drowned. Only the horse made it to shore. Barely alive. It's said she screamed all night on the banks." "Jesus," Jonah muttered. "They built a new bridge right over the wreckage. Never recovered the bodies. Town couldn't afford a proper search that deep. Some say the river took them. Others say..." Her voice trailed off. Jonah's skin prickled. "Say what?" "That the horse, her name was Maybelle, stood on that bank every night for weeks. Wouldn't leave. Then one morning, she was just gone. They say she walked into the creek herself." He swallowed. "And Agnes's dam, she refused to cross." And Agnes is her daughter, right? Born right here in the valley." "Yeah." Mavis stared at him. "Blood remembers, Jonah. Especially when the land doesn't forget." The room was suddenly very quiet. Jonah left the store feeling like he was walking through a story that had been waiting for someone to listen. He couldn't stop thinking about the bridge. How his grandfather never mentioned the collapse. How no one ever talked about it. At least, not to his generation. Later that night, back in the barn, Jonah ran his hand down Agnes's neck. "You remember something, don't you, girl?" She turned slightly, her ears twitching. And then he saw it. A small scar near her shoulder, shaped like a crescent moon. He remembered it vaguely from when she was a foal, but had never thought much of it. Now it struck him. Was it a birthmark? Or had something passed down from Maybelle? He had to know more. The next day, he took the long route to the library in Weydon. Not many people used it anymore, but the town's records were still kept in dusty boxes in the basement. He spent hours combing through brittle newspaper clippings, land deeds, and yellowing photos. Most of it was dull: harvest festivals, town meetings, births, and deaths. Then he found it. Weydon Weekly Gazette, December 12, 1902. Family lost in bridge collapse, 4 dead, horse survives. There was a photo of the original bridge. Narrow, beautiful in its old way, and deadly. He flipped through pages until he found another article. Weeks later, January 3, 1903, mysterious night cries reported near Coldmere Creek. Residents claim to hear crying or screaming from the woods at night. Sheriff attributes it to wolves or freezing wind. No evidence of disturbance found. Some believe it's the drowned horse, still mourning her owners. Jonah exhaled slowly. He wasn't superstitious. But the pattern was hard to ignore. A tragedy. A horse that survived and grieved. A foal born into that legacy. And now, a century later, Agnes wouldn't set one hoof on that same ground. That night, he returned to the bridge. Not to cross, but to watch. He brought a lantern and a stool and sat just before the first board. Agnes stayed behind in the trees, calm but distant. The wind picked up around midnight. Leaves rustled. And then he heard it. The bridge creaked once. Twice. But there was no one on it. The creek below bubbled softly, and yet the planks shuddered like something was walking across. Jonah stood, lantern shaking in his hand. Then, from the shadows of the woods beside the bridge, came a sound that made the hair on his neck rise. A low, guttural breath. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't wind. It sounded like pain. Or warning. Jonah took a step back. Behind him, Agnes neighed loudly, her eyes locked on the bridge. She reared once, just slightly. And then, somewhere beneath the bridge, below the earth and the water, he thought he heard a whisper. It said one word. A name. Maybelle. Jonah dropped the lantern. Darkness swallowed the bridge. And for the first time in years, he ran. Not because he didn't believe, but because he did. Jonah Miller didn't sleep the night after he heard the name. He couldn't. Not after the sound. Not a voice, but something older, colder, pressing through the air like mist curling under a door. Maybelle. It echoed inside his skull, clinging to him like fog on his coat. By morning, his hands still trembled as he poured his coffee. He didn't taste it. His eyes kept drifting to the tree line just beyond the barn, where the bridge loomed in silence. Agnes stood near the fence, oddly calm, as if she'd known it was coming. As if the whisper had finally said something she'd been waiting for him to hear. He couldn't deny it anymore. Something was buried out there. In time, in water, in memory. And now, it wanted to be found. He returned to the barn and opened his grandfather's trunk again. At the very bottom, tucked beneath faded canvas and an old lariat, was something he hadn't noticed before. A small tin box, dented and latched shut. Inside was a folded map of the valley, drawn by hand, with rough pencil marks scribbled in the margins. Jonah unfolded it carefully. Near the bridge, someone, likely Thomas, had drawn a circle. Beside it, one word. Remember. Below it, in a shaky hand, another. Buried. Jonah swallowed. That evening, as dusk draped its velvet cloak over Briar Valley, Jonah loaded a lantern, a spade, and a pair of gloves into a canvas bag and walked alone to the foot of the Coldmere Bridge. The fog had returned. Not the heavy kind that blinds you, but a low, silver mist that clung to the ground, as though reluctant to leave. The river below gurgled quietly. The air smelled of moss and wood and age. Jonah didn't cross the bridge. He turned instead and walked down the slope along the riverbank, where the foundation stones met the silt. The earth was soft, damp. Each step squished underfoot. He lit the lantern and hung it on a nail in a nearby tree, its warm glow casting trembling shadows across the ground. He began to dig. 1 foot down. Roots tangled like veins. 2 feet. Mud clung to the shovel like regret. The lantern flickered as if the air itself held its breath. Then the shovel struck something. Not stone. Not wood. Something hollow. Jonah dropped to his knees and used his hands. He uncovered a piece of wooden board, smooth, curved. Painted once, but now faded white. He brushed more dirt away. Letters. Painted in blue, barely visible. M. Whitlow, and below that, smaller. December 1902. Jonah's breath caught. Whitlow was the family name. From the article. The ones who died in the collapse. He reached farther, brushed back more dirt. And froze. Just beneath the board, wrapped in burlap that had fused with the earth, was something unmistakable. Bone. Small. Fragile. A child's femur. Jonah sat back hard, the air punched from his lungs. They never recovered the bodies. But one had never left. The board had been part of the original sled. A grave marker, perhaps. Or maybe a makeshift memorial someone had made, too poor to buy a stone. But who buried it here? His grandfather? Someone else who remembered? Jonah couldn't tell. But something had been calling. Not just Agnes, not just Maybelle's memory. But the child. Buried here. Forgotten by records. Not by blood. As Jonah knelt again, whispering apologies he couldn't explain, he felt the ground vibrate softly beneath his knees. He looked up. The fog had thickened. The bridge stood silent. But something shimmered beneath its beams. A shape. Not clear. Not human. Not animal. A flicker of white movement, like a shadow without a source, gliding just above the surface of the creek. Then it was gone. Agnes whinnied from the tree lean above. Not in fear. In answer. Jonah stood, hands filthy, heart pounding. And then, he heard it. Footsteps on the bridge. Heavy. Measured. Hooves. But no horse stood there. The lantern flickered violently. And went out. Darkness fell. Then silence. Until the river sighed once more. The whisper returned. Not a name this time. Just a plea. Help her. Jonah stood in the dark, alone but not truly. Something had awakened. And it wouldn't rest until all the forgotten were brought to light. The next morning, Jonah woke with a weight pressing on his chest. Not from fatigue, though he had hardly slept, but from a realization that made the air feel thick even before sunrise. Agnes knew something. Not just refused. Not just remembered. Knew. He saddled her in silence. She didn't resist. She didn't look back toward the bridge. Instead, she stood calm and expectant. As though she'd been waiting for this ride her whole life. Jonah didn't guide her. He let go of the reins. She turned her head west, then began walking slowly through the valley trail he rarely used. The path wound between ancient oaks and past sunken fence lines no one had maintained in decades. He knew where she was going before they arrived. The Whitlow farmstead. It had been abandoned for nearly a century, after the collapse and the loss of the family. No one had ever moved in. Locals said the land felt wrong. No animals ever grazed there. The air always stayed a little colder. But Agnes stepped onto the property without fear. Jonah dismounted and stood before what was left of the house. The walls were bowed inward. The porch had collapsed into splinters. And yet, something about it still stood proud, like a memory refusing to fall. He stepped inside. Floorboards creaked under his boots. Dust danced in streaks of morning light. A broken picture frame lay face down on the floor. Jonah knelt, brushing away debris. Inside was a faded portrait. Just enough detail to show a mother, a father, and 2 children. The smallest child, a girl, had a white ribbon tied around her wrist. Jonah remembered the bone under the bridge. Small. Fragile. A girl's. He stood, throat tight. In the corner, Agnes stumped once. Then twice. She was looking toward the kitchen. Jonah followed her gaze. Behind an old cupboard, there was a square outline in the wall, lighter than the wood around it. He pried at it with his pocket knife. A door. He opened it. Inside was a hidden cubby, wrapped in layers of cloth long since stained by time. At the bottom lay a bundle of papers. Letters, bound in ribbon. And a small wooden carving of a horse, smooth and worn down by little hands. He opened the top letter. The handwriting was fragile, careful. Dearest Papa, if anything happens to us, please know we loved you. I tried to be brave for Mama when the boards cracked. The horse screamed. I think she's still alive. Please don't blame her. I hope she finds her way back home. I named her Maybelle. She was always my friend. Love, Liddy. Jonah dropped the letter. The girl's name was Liddy. And she had written this before the sled fell. Maybe moments before. Left it hidden here. Her final words. Words no one ever found, until Agnes brought him here. He looked at the horse, now calmly grazing. You remember her, Jonah whispered. You remember the one she loved. Back at the barn that evening, Jonah spread the letters out on his grandfather's workbench. Some were from the father, Thomas Whitlow, to his brother. Others were notes from Liddy's older brother, Sam, who had sent a few letters from Chicago before the family vanished. The last was a telegram, yellowed and torn. Received word of collapse. I'm coming. If bodies are not found, they'll never rest. Neither will I. SWSW Sam Whitlow. Jonah now had a direction. Sam went looking. And maybe, never stopped. He pulled out his laptop and started searching the old land records and genealogy archives. After hours of digging, he found it. Samuel Whitlow. Born, 1890, Briar Valley, VA. Moved to Jackson, Tennessee. 1904. Died, 1973. Listed occupation, caretaker, horseman. A note in the margin said he never married. No children. But his final property was still listed, Whitlow's Hollow, a private ranch just outside Jackson. A remote place. Still standing. Jonah stared at the screen. Could it be? Could a boy who lost everything have built a life around waiting for someone? Or something to come home? He didn't know, but he had to find out. That night, just before bed, Jonah stepped outside with Agnes. She stood at the fence line, her mane catching the moonlight. He whispered, "Do you want to go?" Agnes turned her head slowly toward him. She didn't nod. She didn't rear. She simply walked forward and pressed her muzzle against his chest. Gently, firmly, as if to say, yes. Then she stepped away, turned back to the field, and looked west again. Toward Tennessee. Toward the last man who remembered. The road to Tennessee was long, lonely, and full of ghosts. Jonah drove a battered pickup with Agnes in the trailer behind him, the old wood creaking every time she shifted her weight. It felt less like he was transporting a horse and more like escorting a witness. One who had held her silence for over a century and was now ready to speak. Only not in words. Just beyond Jackson, the landscape grew quieter. Fewer gas stations. No more fast food. The GPS gave up. Cell service vanished. The directions became memory and instinct. An odd sense that Agnes knew the turns before Jonah made them. She stumped once when they passed an old oak that forked the road. Then twice when they reached a crooked mailbox with a name barely legible through rust, Whitlow's Hollow. The ranch was smaller than Jonah expected. A wide clearing surrounded by forest. A single barn, sagging but sturdy. A two-story house with peeling paint but clean windows, as if someone had cared, even when no one was watching. A windmill creaked overhead. No sign of people. Jonah stepped out, Agnes following quietly. She didn't need a lead rope. He walked to the porch and knocked. No answer. Then again. Nothing. He tried the knob. Unlocked. Inside, it smelled of cedar and something faintly sweet like apples stored in cellars long after harvest. The walls were lined with shelves packed full of books and binders. Dozens of framed photos, most of horses. Some of children. But one stood out. A black and white image of a man in his 20s. Wiry. Sharp-eyed. Holding a young foal with a white blaze on its nose. The same blaze Agnes had. Jonah's stomach twisted. He looked closer. Written in cursive at the bottom of the frame. Me and Maybelle, 1910. Jackson Fair. Maybelle. It wasn't a name Jonah had given. It was hers. Passed down from the child who died. Somehow, inexplicably carried through the decades, from generation to generation. Until Agnes was born. Maybelle had returned. But that meant she'd never truly left. Jonah turned toward a wooden desk near the back wall. Papers were stacked in neat piles. A ledger lay open. The handwriting was precise, aged. The top entry read, March 1946 saw her again. Same white blaze. Born to ember, just like before. Keeps coming back. Don't know why. She finds me, always. Even when I'm not looking. Each decade had an entry. The same pattern. A horse with the same markings. The same eyes. Always born here. Always to a line descended from that original foal. He flipped to the final page. March 1973 she hasn't come this time. Maybe she's lost. Or maybe, she remembers what happened. Maybe she's still afraid. I leave the barn door open every night. Just in case. If anyone ever reads this, tell her I never stopped waiting. Tell her I still believe in the bridge. Sam. Jonah sat back, throat dry. Sam Whitlow had spent a lifetime searching for something more than a horse. He'd believed, quietly, fiercely, that Maybelle would return. And now she had. Jonah stepped outside. Agnes was already standing near the barn, ears alert, body still. The wind shifted. The barn door creaked open. On its own. Inside, the space was clean. Empty except for a single stall in the corner, covered in a faded blue blanket. Jonah stepped in behind Agnes. She didn't hesitate. She walked straight to the stall, lowered her head, and nuzzled the wooden gate. Then, slowly, she entered. The moment her hooves touched the straw, the wind outside stopped. A silence fell, not eerie, but complete, like the world was holding its breath in reverence. And then, without warning, she neighed. Not a sound of panic or alarm, but recognition. Joy. As if something had been completed. As if a promise had been kept. Jonah stood frozen. He felt it, deep in his bones. Something had returned. And something had been released. Later that night, Jonah sat on the porch, watching stars flicker above the trees. Agnes stood in the field, calm, grazing near a wind-worn cross someone had built out of fence rails. Beneath it, a name had been carved into the wood. Samuel Whitlow, 1890 to 1973. I left the barn door open. Jonah whispered into the darkness. She came home. And somewhere in the trees, he thought he heard a voice, soft, distant, and smiling. Thank you. The letter that waited. Jonah didn't sleep. Even with the weight of peace that had settled over Whitlow's hollow, something deeper stirred. Not restlessness. Readiness. It wasn't over. Agnes Maybelle had returned. But something was still missing. He loaded her into the trailer as the morning sun laced the horizon. She didn't resist. Didn't hesitate. Just walked in, calm and certain, as if she knew the journey wasn't done. They drove back to Virginia. No music. No phone. Just the soft clink of Agnes shifting her weight and the low hum of tires eating highway. It was dusk by the time they reached Briar Valley. And the sky was turning the same golden violet it had the day Jonah first saw her by the river. He parked near the Coldmere Bridge. Not the new one, but the old, rotting skeleton half hidden by overgrowth. The place where the girl's body had once been found. Where Maybelle had once stood watch for days, unmoving, until the weather turned. The same place where Jonah had found her 2 years ago, battered and bleeding, eyes full of something more than pain. He walked toward the rusted guardrail, the boards beneath him groaning. Agnes followed at his side. And that's when he saw it. A small tin box, nailed gently to the underside of the bridge's wooden rail. Fresh nails. Fresh wood. Not rusted. Not old. Someone had left it recently. Jonah pried it free and opened the lid. Inside was a letter, folded twice and sealed with wax. The seal was old-fashioned. A horse's hoofprint in the wax. He broke it open with shaking hands. The handwriting was tight, careful. But it was the name at the top that stopped his breath. To Jonah Bellamy. I don't know how long it will take for you to find this. Or if she'll make it back to you before it does. I only know what my great-uncle told me before he passed. If she ever returns, it'll be when someone truly sees her. Not as a horse, but as memory. You've seen her. I don't know how. I don't even know if she's the same, or if she just carries the weight of all who came before. But what you need to understand is this. Maybelle never forgot. She never moved on. She's been trying to complete the loop. My uncle said he heard her the night before he died. A single hoof step. Then silence. He smiled when he passed, like he'd been waiting all his life to hear it. If she came to you, you have to take her one last place. Not the farm. Not the barn. The ravine. Where the sled fell. There's something still buried there. Something she left behind. Something that doesn't belong in the ground. Find it. Let her let go. Miriam Whitlow, great-grandniece of Sam. Jonah reread the letter 3 times. His heart pounded. The ravine. The place where it all began. Where a child died. Where a horse survived. Where 100 winters passed, and a story refused to be forgotten. He turned to Agnes. She was already facing west, toward the ravine. Waiting. They didn't wait for morning. The moon rose full, casting silver light on the valley as Jonah led Agnes along the old hunting trail. Brush scratched at his boots. Owls hooted in the distance. The trees opened like quiet sentinels to let them through. And then, it appeared. A cleft in the earth, long forgotten and overgrown. The trail dipped sharply. Roots curled like fingers around stone. Jonah stood at the edge and looked down. This was it. Where the Whitlow family sled had slipped. Where Liddy had fallen. Where Maybelle had tried to climb back up, hooves shattered and lungs torn. But now Agnes stepped forward. She didn't tremble. Didn't flinch. She walked slowly down the incline, hoof by hoof, into the ravine. Jonah followed, flashlight sweeping. Branches cracked. Stones shifted. Then he saw it. A glint beneath the soil. Not gold. Not silver. Something dull and rounded. He dropped to his knees and dug with bare hands. A ribbon. White. Weathered. Torn but still tied. Wrapped around a child's wrist bone. Liddy's. And beneath it, pressed into the earth like a fossil, was a carved wooden heart. A child's toy. The initials LW scratched into the surface. Liddy Whitlow. Jonah felt tears slip down his cheek. This was what she came back for. Not for a barn. Not for a home. But to bring her girl back. One last time. He held the ribbon in his hand and turned to Agnes. She stepped forward. Lowered her head. And nuzzled the ribbon with a soft exhale. Then, for the first time in hours, she lay down beside it. In the ravine. As if she had been waiting 100 years to rest here, in peace. And then something strange happened. The air warmed. The trees above swayed, though there was no wind. A soft shimmer seemed to pass through the clearing, like the world exhaled. Agnes stood again. Walked to Jonah. And in her eyes, something was different. Not sorrow. Not weight. Relief. The circle had closed. The child was no longer alone. The letters from the remembered. Jonah's life shifted in the weeks after Liddy's burial, but not in ways he expected. The story of Maybelle, the horse who never forgot, spread quietly. Not viral, but like a ripple in a pond that reaches far beyond the shore. Then, the letters began. It started with a plain envelope slipped through his mailbox one early morning. No return address. No stamp. Inside, a single page, typed but with shaky handwriting at the bottom. I saw her eyes. Not just a horse's eyes. Something deeper. Something old and patient. You're not alone. Others remember too. Follow the signs. Jonah's heart raced. Was this real? A prank? A coincidence? Then another letter arrived. This one postmarked from Vermont. It spoke of a dog who waited at a train station for 20 years after his owner disappeared, never giving up hope. And a third, from a small town in Oregon, telling a story about a raven who guided a grieving widow through her darkest days, always returning to her window at sunset. Each letter was different, but the message was the same. Animals remember. They wait. They watch. They carry our stories. Jonah sat at his desk, surrounded by the growing stack. He read every letter carefully, noting patterns, dates, names, places. There was something unifying them. Something that tied the stories to his own. It wasn't just memory. It was connection. He decided to do something no one else had done. He created a website. A place where people could share their stories of animals who remembered, who waited, who loved beyond words. At first, it was quiet. But then the messages came flooding in. Stories from around the world. From people who'd lost a beloved pet, only to find signs of their spirit in the wild. From strangers who'd been saved by animals at moments they thought they were alone. From children who'd dreamed of a creature that guided them back to safety. Jonah realized this wasn't just about Maybelle anymore. It was about something greater. A network of love and remembrance, woven through time and species. He began to plan a journey. To meet some of these people. To see the animals. To find out if Maybelle's story was unique. Or part of a larger truth waiting to be uncovered. That night, as Jonah closed his laptop, Agnes stood by the window, watching the stars. Her eyes reflected the moonlight, ancient and wise. Jonah reached out and touched her mane. Let's see where this path takes us, girl. And with that, a new chapter began. The Secret Keepers. Jonah's first stop was Vermont. The place from one of the letters, a story about a dog who had waited at a train station for 2 decades. When he arrived in the sleepy mountain town of Lyndonville, the cold air smelled of pine and promise. He met Maggie, a retired schoolteacher with silver hair and eyes full of kindness. She told him about Jasper, the golden retriever who had waited daily on the same bench after her husband disappeared in a hiking accident. He never gave up, Maggie said, her voice trembling. Even when they said he should forget, he waited. That kind of love, it's not ordinary. Jonah listened, feeling the threads of something larger weaving through each tale. Then came an invitation. A note slipped under Maggie's door had led them both to a small cabin deep in the woods, where a group of people gathered. Called themselves the Keepers. The Keepers believed animals were more than companions. They were guardians of memory, bridges between the living and the lost. They studied patterns, shared stories, and protected places where these bonds thrived. Jonah was welcomed into their circle, his story of Maybelle sparking a mix of awe and respect. You're not alone, said an elder named Thomas, his eyes glinting like a hawk's. The world is full of remembering souls. And it's our duty to honor them. Jonah realized his journey was no longer just about one horse or one child. It was about a hidden web of love, waiting to be discovered and shared. The Sanctuary of Memory. Jonah stood at the edge of the clearing, where tall pines whispered ancient secrets and soft moss carpeted the earth. Around him, the keepers gathered, faces illuminated by the golden light of late afternoon. This was no longer just a journey. It was a mission. A sanctuary was being built here, deep in the Vermont woods, for the animals who remembered, and for the people who loved them. A place where stories like Maybelle's could live on, protected and honored. Jonah watched Agnes step into the clearing beside him. She was calm, steady, the weight of centuries carried lightly in her gait. Around her neck hung a simple braided rope, a symbol of the bond between human and animal, past and present. He felt something shift inside. A quiet joy, a deep peace. The keepers had taught him that memory was a living thing. Not just in our minds, but in the hearts of those who wait, those who watch, those who never forget. Over the following months, the sanctuary grew. Wooden fences carved paths through the forest. Shelters rose, crafted with care and respect. Jonah helped bring together stories from around the world, each a thread in the tapestry of remembrance. And he told Maybelle's story. Her loyalty, her grief, her return. It became a beacon. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the air cooled, Jonah found himself by the Coldmere Bridge. Now a place of pilgrimage for those who understood. Agnes nuzzled his hand gently. He whispered a promise. "We'll keep telling your story, girl. For everyone who remembers. For everyone who waits." And as the wind carried his words across the valley, Jonah knew this was just the beginning. Some stories don't end. They echo in the hearts of those who remember. And sometimes, just sometimes, a horse waits 100 years to remind us all what it means to love. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey through this wonderful tale. If this story touched your heart, please give it a thumbs up, share it with someone who loves mystical tales. And don't forget to subscribe to The Real Furry Stories for more unforgettable stories of love, loss, and the bonds that never die. Until next time, may your lanterns always stay lit. Hearty goodbye.